You alive?
Yes.
Okay, start waving to the people. Hello, everybody in the free world and watching around the world. This is Lichtman Live. I'm Sam Lichtman, here with Distinguished Professor of History at where?
American University in beautiful Washington, D.C. And there may be people in the non-free world listening.
And there may be people in the non-free world listening. I said around the world. I said to people in the free world and around the world. Yes, so come on. Hello, Barry Smith. Hello, Michael D'Souza. Hello, RBC. Hello, Anthony Michael Guitarist. Hello, Patrick Murray, Connor Katara, Karen Strickler, Kevin, Ross, Captain M90s. We got a lot of people in the chat today already, Dad.
Cool.
How do you feel about that?
I like it. The more the merrier. More questions, the better.
Hello, Smoking Cat. Hello, Harry Ho. Hello, Jamie Smith. Hello, Paul Folio. Hello, Mike D. Nicola. Hello, Andrew. A lot of hellos in the chat today, Dad. Say hello to the people, man.
Hey, hello. I'm ready for your questions. Don't ask me about opera, but you can ask me about anything else. Speaking
of beautiful Washington, D.C., as you mentioned earlier, a lot happening in the last few days in Washington, D.C. Just to recap, just a few hours ago, Hunter Biden was indicted with gun charges. The House GOP and Kevin McCarthy have opened an impeachment inquiry into Joe Biden. There has been, probably tonight at midnight, there will be a big United Auto Workers strike, which could have pretty big ramifications for the economy. So there's a lot going on is what I'm trying to say, Dad.
I couldn't disagree with that. And it's all important.
And it's all important. I think everybody in the chat also agrees. It's important, right, guys? Throw a heart in the chat. Throw us a like if you agree. We only got 17 likes, but we got 49 people watching. Come on, give us a like, guys. Okay. They're asking, what does my shirt say? My shirt says peace in Arabic, Hebrew, and English.
Pretty
Patrick
good.
Patrick Murray wanted to know.
Triple piece.
What does your shirt say?
My initials.
AJL. He's always got his initials on this shirt, guys. Okay, where do you want to start today?
I want to start with impeachment.
Okay, go for it.
Look, in the first 120 years of the American Republic, there was one impeachment. Impeachment of Andrew Johnson in 1868. But in the last 22 years or so, there were three more impeachments. One of Bill Clinton, two of Donald Trump. And now we have an impeachment inquiry, which, by the way, was not voted upon by the full House, breaking precedent, just announced by the Speaker of the House.
Can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
The Speaker, Kevin McCarthy, says that's because Nancy Pelosi changed precedent. What do you say to that?
Well, they eventually did vote the full House for an impeachment inquiry. So, that's probably the only time ever Kevin McCarthy would base anything he did on Nancy Pelosi. It's just quite extraordinary. But here's the thing. In the other three recent impeachments, there was real evidence of wrongdoing. Bill Clinton had perjured himself about his consensual affair with Monica Lewinsky. He had tried to cover it up. Donald Trump had pressured the newly elected president of Ukraine to investigate his political opponent, bringing in a foreign nation into an American campaign, and pressured them to adopt the Russian intelligence propaganda line that it was really Ukraine, not Russia, that intervened in the 2016 election, remarkably on behalf of Hillary Clinton. And then, of course, the second impeachment of Donald Trump resulted from his attempt to overturn our democracy and steal a democratic election. What's different here is there's no evidence. It's all made up. It's just like the charge that the 2020 election was stolen. It's the big lie. You say it often enough, and you hope people come to believe it. They've been investigating these so-called charges against Joe Biden for years, and they've never come up with anything. Even the Attorney General, Bill Barr, the great loyalist of Donald Trump, looked into it and couldn't come up with anything. And by the way, they're talking about stuff that happened for the most part 8 years ago, but there is no there there. This is part of an MO that we've seen from Donald Trump and his allies. What are they really good at? Deflecting, delaying, and distracting. That's what this is all about, to try to deflect and distract and say, oh, Joe Biden is just as corrupt or more corrupt as Donald Trump, even though it's all made up, just like the big lie about the 2020 election. But that's not going to stop them.
Okay. Can I push back a little bit? I'm not saying this because I believe it. I'm just saying it to try to
be a wise guy.
Get to the truth here and get some answers. You say there's no evidence, there's no there. I've been watching a ton of clips online of Republicans in the House saying there is evidence and there is a there. And I think we're running into a problem where the people on Biden's side are saying there's no evidence. The people on the Republican side saying there is evidence. How do we come to the truth here?
Very easily. The onus is on the Republicans. It's not Joe Biden's job to prove a negative. Just that, that there isn't a there. It's if you're going to start impeachment, you've got to show that you have really strong and powerful evidence of high crimes and misdemeanors. As I said, this isn't anything new. They've been looking into this for years, and they haven't come up with anything at all. But it doesn't matter any more than it mattered whether or not there was any real evidence of consequential fraud in the 2020 election. Trump and his allies are still pursuing, years later, that line.
Can we do a little segment real quick, Dad, that I like to call They Say, Professor Says? Can I lay down some of the things I've heard Republicans say in terms of their backing and their evidence and get your response to it?
Sure.
They say that Joe Biden lied about his business dealings with Hunter Biden. They say he said he never involved himself with business dealings, but they are saying that is a lie, and there is evidence of him being on calls and Zoom calls with Hunter Biden involving Hunter Biden's business deals.
There is evidence of Zoom calls that he was on the call, but he did not in any way participate in those calls with respect to Hunter Biden's dealings. Their big charge, and the only one that has any significance, is that he dismissed or advocated the dismissal of this prosecutor in Ukraine, allegedly to stop him from investigating Hunter Biden. The opposite is true. The European Union, other American officials, everyone who looked into that said that prosecutor wasn't prosecuting, he was corrupt, and he needed to be removed. This was established years ago, and yet they're still pursuing that phony line. And they haven't shown that Joe Biden got a single dollar from corrupt dealings. If you really want to look into money, why don't you look into the $2 billion that Ivanka Trump and Ivanka Kushner and Jared Kushner got from the Saudis? $2 billion. That's documented, and nobody really knows exactly why the Saudis gave all of this money to Donald Trump's son-in-law and daughter.
Another thing they say, Dad, is that he is referenced with pseudonyms in a bunch of business dealings, and that is a red flag to them. What do you say to that?
Yeah, that's all bogus. This is evidence presented by totally unreliable people in Ukraine with an axe to grind. It's all a nothing burger. It doesn't go anywhere because they haven't connected that to any kind of corruption on the part of Biden. And by the way, these are things that happened 8 years ago. They have nothing to do with what he's doing in his presidency. Every other impeachment has focused on acts while the president was in office, not years and years before.
Very good point. Another thing they say, that there are a bunch of shell companies set up that are funneling money to Biden.
Joe Biden?
That's what they're saying.
Yeah, they say that, but they haven't produced a shred of evidence in 4 years to show any corrupt money being funneled to Joe Biden. You can say anything you want. You can say the 2020 election was stolen. You could say, as Donald Trump did, oh, the COVID-19 epidemic is just going to disappear. It's just going to go away. But that doesn't mean there's any truth behind things you make up.
They also say that his houses, his lifestyle proves that he's making a lot of money beyond his normal means. And where is this money coming from for him to buy big vacation homes, beach houses, expensive cars, things like that?
I don't see any reason to connect that with any corrupt dealings. You know, Joe Biden over time has made speeches. He's written books, gotten a lot of money in that regard. You've got to show a connection between that and corrupt money coming into the Bidens, and they've shown no connections. Again, they're just making things up. You can accuse anybody of anything, but you got to have some kind of proof. And in 4 years, they've had no proof. It's not like this investigation is just starting, you know, when Kevin McCarthy made his announcement. Even Republicans, not Democrats, but Republicans have said there isn't any evidence that we've uncovered yet.
Right. All right. I think you did a pretty good job of answering a lot of their big points. You covered Burisma. You talked about the shell companies. You talked about the emails, the business dealings.
And I'm not even a lawyer.
And you're not even a lawyer. And one thing I've noticed the last couple of days, I've been watching a lot of their talking points because I
pity you.
Look, I think it's important to get to the truth here, and we have to know what the Republicans are saying to figure out what the truth is, right? So I've been watching a lot, and I'm posing a lot of questions to you, just so.
And I think I've been able to answer them.
I think you've been able to answer them well.
Bottom line, you don't have to believe me. Just look at the many Republicans who've admitted they don't have anything.
I don't think that's a good line. I think
it's a really good
line. Talk
line.
to the facts of the case. I mean, yeah.
But there are no facts.
Well, right. Okay. One thing I've noticed in watching them and a lot of their talking points is they often, when they're making these accusations, they say the Biden family, the Biden family, the Biden family, which I think is a cover for them to muddy the waters because they don't have, like you said, the actual evidence to one-to-one connect Biden to this.
Yeah, you're not impeaching the Biden family.
Right, exactly.
You're impeaching Joe Biden. We can all admit Hunter Biden is a bad guy. He's had all kinds of problems, but so was Billy Carter, you know, Jimmy Carter's reprobate brother. That didn't make Jimmy Carter any less of a moral person. In fact, if you look at the history of the presidency, presidential relatives have been, you know, had all kinds of problems. But that doesn't mean that the president himself did anything wrong. Jimmy Carter didn't do anything wrong. Billy Carter did.
Yeah, I agree that it seems that his son and his brother have used their name in sketchy ways. There seems to be no doubt about that.
Let's not forget about Nixon burgers.
Yes, Nixon
Richard
burgers.
Nixon's brother tried to exploit Richard Nixon's name. Let's not forget about Teddy Roosevelt's daughter who was this wild person, and Teddy said, "I can either control my daughter or I can run the country, but I can't do both."
Yeah, it seems like Hunter Biden is not controllable. He seemed, especially in his dark days, he seemed to be doing some really bad things.
And by the way, he was indicted. And yet the Republicans are claiming, the Justice Department is under the thumb of Joe Biden. He's weaponized it. He's politicized it. And yet here they go. The Justice Department indicts the president's son. We've never seen anything like that before. And by the way, what's he indicted for so far? Gun charges. Republicans hate gun regulations. They would normally applaud someone who was being charged with gun regulations. They called Kyle Rittenhouse, the guy who killed some protesters with an illegal gun, a hero. So, I wonder, what they're going to make of these gun charges. Are they going to call it, the crime of the century now?
A lot of people asking in the chat, a lot of people about the scandal key and how this new inquiry will affect that.
Unless they come up with something, not at all. I mean, you can't just manufacture a scandal out of whole cloth any more than you can manufacture out of whole cloth the notion that the 2020 election was rigged and stolen. You've got to have evidence and proof.
Do you think this will actually help Biden? Because we've seen with the new Trump indictments, with the Bill Clinton impeachment, we've seen often that actually it helps candidates or presidents when they fall into this. It didn't seem to affect Trump much when he was impeached, right?
Not at all. You know, the remarkable thing about Trump is nothing affects him. If you look at 8 years from 2015 to right now, Donald Trump's approval rating never changes. It's from the high 30s to the low 40s, no matter what happens. 2 impeachments, 91 felony charges, a civil verdict that he sexually assaulted E. Jean Carroll and defamed him, a criminal verdict against the Trump organization. None of it matters.
We get it. You go over this every time.
None of it matters.
Every time you go, we understand. I asked you specifically about Joe Biden.
I don't think it will hurt Joe Biden. Whether it'll help him or not, it might, because the Republicans could well find themselves accused of political overreach, and that's not going to help them. Plus, you know, do the American people really want the Congress to be spending their time doing this?
But Republicans said the same. The Republicans said that's not. I don't think that's a good thing. Republicans said the same thing when they were impeaching Trump. I mean, they're talking points on both sides.
Right. But my point is, who knows how this might affect Biden?
The reason I interrupted him, guys, is because he always seems to bring it back to Trump. I asked him a question about Joe Biden, and somehow he started talking about Trump and listing things that we already know. So, and a lot of people come after me for saying I interrupt you, but I feel sometimes I feel sometimes it's necessary.
He needs to be disciplined, doesn't he?
All right, so what happens next? So are they just going to start subpoenaing people?
Yes.
And people are just going to be testifying, and then what happens after that?
Then they have to decide whether to move to adopt articles of impeachment and then have those articles of impeachment voted upon by the House. And if they pass articles of impeachment, it will go to the Senate, where, of course, no president has ever been convicted, and there's zero chance of this Senate convicting Joe Biden. But that's way down the road. You know, we're just at the beginning of the process. And so far, as I said, unlike any other impeachment inquiry, there is no there.
Okay, sorry guys, going to the chat now. We've just been chatting. Now we're going to the actual chat. We've got 2 super chats from Captain M90s. Thank you, Captain M90s. Cool. As you know, that helps keep the stream alive. Costs a lot of money to get this going. Costs a lot of money for the equipment to keep it running. So your donations,
and none of it goes to me.
And your donations are very appreciated. They asked 2 questions.
Yes.
2 questions. Number 1.
One at a time. I'm old.
All right. Aren't impeachment scandals for the president?
Well, first of all, there isn't an impeachment yet. There's just an impeachment inquiry. So that's premature. 2, yes, past impeachments because they were based on real acts and real evidence and real abuses of power, including the Democrat Bill Clinton. I'm not sparing him from this. Those did trigger the scandal key. But unless the inquiry comes up with something that they haven't found in the last 4 years, I don't see how it triggers the scandal key. But I'm open-minded. I'm willing to see.
If Manchin votes to convict, wouldn't that trigger a bipartisan scandal? Yes.
That could hurt.
Thank you, Captain M90s.
But we're a long way from that. We haven't even had a House vote on an impeachment inquiry, much less a House vote on articles of impeachment. So I'm open-minded. If they find something, so be it. But given, how long they've been pursuing this and come up with nothing, I'm skeptical.
Another super chat from Connor Katara. Thank you, Connor. We appreciate it. With the impeachment of Andrew Johnson in 1868, how was the scandal key not false for the election of 1868?
Well, when you say not false, I think that impeachment of Andrew Johnson was a major scandal, but there was a big issue in 1868. Got to remember, how did Andrew Johnson become president? He was the Democratic wartime governor of Tennessee. And in 1864, Abraham Lincoln dumped Hannibal Hamlin, his vice president, and picked up Johnson because he wanted to run as a unified, nonpartisan ticket with a Democratic vice president. So when Lincoln dies, you have a Democrat serving as president in an administration that originally elected a Republican. So it gets pretty murky in 1868.
Things were pretty murky around that time in the United States, huh?
Yeah, and of course, you had a solidly Republican Congress and Andrew Johnson completely at odds on Reconstruction policy with the Congress. The Congress, in those days, Republicans were the party of civil rights and black rights, and they were pushing in Reconstruction for black rights. And Andrew Johnson, the accidental president, was pushing against them, and that's what led to the impeachment.
Thank you, Connor.
Great question.
Great question. A good question from Will Struchtemeyer.
Did you get that pronounced right?
I think so.
All right, very good. I couldn't have done it.
Struchtemeyer.
I believe you.
Well, you were questioning me, so I had to prove. How important are the conventions when deciding on the keys?
Conventions used to be very important. Conventions actually used to be the critical inflection point in nominating presidents. That changed in another very messy year, 1968. As you know, Lyndon Johnson, the sitting president, was driven out of office by his own party, by the anti-war wing of his party, led by Senator McCarthy and Senator Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, Eugene McCarthy, and he withdrew. And it looked like Kennedy would become the nominee, and then, of course, he was assassinated right after his victory in the California primary. And so the Democrats nominated the vice president, Hubert Humphrey, who hadn't run in the primaries at all. But as a sop to the anti-war group headed by George McGovern, they let George McGovern head a committee on delegate selection, and that committee changed everything. Instead of the party bosses appointing delegates to the convention under the new McGovern rules that Republicans also closely adopted, all delegates had to be selected in advance in open primaries and open caucuses. And since then, essentially, the nominees have been chosen even before the conventions meet. There have been some close votes in the convention, but for the most part, nominees are selected by primaries and caucuses.
Jamie Smith asks, question, in the midterms, the Dems lost seats in the House but outperformed expectations, losing very few seats for a midterm. Do the Dems still lose the party mandate key?
They do. The party mandate key is strictly mathematical. It simply looks at whether the Democrats hold more seats after the latest midterm as compared to what they held in the previous midterm. So it's purely math, and yes, the Democrats lose the mandate key, even though outside the context of the keys, you could fairly say they did better than expected, particularly in the Senate, actually expanding from 50 to 51 seats.
Ross Goldberg asks, Biden and the Democrats have been continuing to lose a significant amount of support from Black, Hispanic, and other non-white voters and working class voters. How concerning is that for Democrats?
I think it is concerning to Democrats. And this is, I've been highly critical of Democrats before, and I would be highly critical of Democrats as well. Number one, their outreach programs, their grassroots programs to minorities have not been nearly as effective as they should be. I hear that they're ramping that up, but we'll see. Second problem is their messaging is awful. Democrats used to be the great master of messaging. Bill Clinton's bridge to the 21st century, Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal. What do they have now? Build back better? What does that mean? Their messaging hasn't been good, particularly, for everyone, but also as it pertains to minorities and working class whites who have no idea, really, what Joe Biden has done and how it's impacted their lives.
We've got President Belichick.
All right.
One of our history teachers in the chat, if I remember correctly.
I remember.
He has given us a super chat. Thank you so much, President Belichick. He asks, was aiding Greece/Turkey a foreign success in 1948?
Yes, it certainly was. That was the policy of containment that proved to be, for the most part, effective, at least in the European theater, in containing communism. But they also lost the failure key because of the communist takeover of China, which was largely blamed on the Truman administration. Of course, that came after the 1948 election. That came in 1949 and was one of the things that hurt the Democrats going into 1952, along with the Korean War. And it was one of the elements that forced Harry Truman, who was eligible to run for re-election because the 22nd Amendment didn't apply to him and only applied after him. But like Lyndon Johnson, he withdrew, creating an open seat that Dwight Eisenhower pretty easily won. And that, has some resonance to what's going on today, of course. And I've said this before, but I can't reiterate it too much because it hasn't penetrated the punditry. There's all this talk, Biden's too old, he should step down. Well, that creates an open seat and a party fight. That's 2 keys lost that they would otherwise gain. 2 keys means they only need to lose 4 more, not 6 more. Plus, the party in power, as in 1952 or 2008 or 2016, almost always loses open seats. So if the Democrats want to hold on to the presidency, the last thing they want to do is create an open seat and an internal party fight.
Super chat from Connor Qatar. Thank you so much, Connor. It really helps. They say, so I've been reading your 2020 edition of The Keys to the White House, and I noticed for the election of 1864, you have key 12, the incumbent charisma key, false for incumbent Abraham Lincoln. Why is that?
That's a great question. And it was a very, very tough call. And the reason is that Lincoln becomes charismatic in retrospect. At the time, he was a very controversial figure. He was considered to be a dictator because of the suspension of habeas corpus. He was considered to be an end lover at a time of widespread racism, not just in the South, but throughout the North as well. Do you know only a handful of New England states with less than 5% of free black people authorized black voting in 1860 at the cusp of the Civil War? Moreover, Lincoln thought he would lose the election of 1864 because he was so unpopular. And he wrote a sealed letter saying, I expect to lose this election, but I hope, we can continue the cause. What won the election for him was the late victories in Virginia and Georgia that turned the tide of what had looked like a stalemated war and changed the whole political landscape and gained him 2 or 3 additional keys.
Derek Taylor. We love you, Derek Taylor. Thank you for the super chat. Could a debate of RFK Jr. Marianne Williamson against Joe Biden during the primary mess up Joe Biden's chances for the presidency?
Well, that's always possible, but I think it's unlikely because these are fringe candidates. To turn the party fight key against the incumbent, the challenger has to get at least 40% of the primary vote or the delegates if it goes to the convention. And right now, those candidates, Williamson isn't even registering, and Kennedy is somewhere around 10%. And usually these fringe candidates decline when you actually get to real voting because people say, well, I kind of like RFK Jr., but I'm not going to waste my vote.
Patrick Murray asks, I could be wrong, but I heard you say on a previous live stream that you don't think Sherrod Brown needs to worry about losing re-election. Could you elaborate?
Well, I'm not sure. That may be too strong a statement that he doesn't have to worry. Candidates should always worry. But Sherrod Brown is a Democratic populist who very much appeals even to the white working class. He's been, the most successful by far recent Democratic politician in Ohio. And while, as you know, I don't go much by the polls, but he does at this point have a very substantial lead over likely Republican challenges. So I wouldn't say he doesn't have to worry. Candidates always worry. I do believe he will prevail.
Here's an interesting question from Darlene Oro. If 70% of the country doesn't want Biden to run again and Kamala Harris would keep the keys, wouldn't it be better for the Dems for Biden to decline and Kamala to run for president?
Well, that wouldn't help because it would still be an open seat. What Biden would have to do, and he's not going to do this, would be to not just not run, but resign the presidency and let Kamala Harris become the incumbent president. So you don't actually have an open seat. Just like you didn't have an open seat when in 1948, when Harry Truman became the president after the death of FDR, or Lyndon Johnson in 1964.
Here's a question from Andrew, concurrent viewer. What's up, Andrew? That I've been thinking a lot about too, and I kind of agree with. Well, I don't know if this is a statement from him, but he's saying, considering the indictments, the possible convention, the strength of the economy right now, do you think Trump may just lose in a total landslide in 24? I sort of think it's possible.
Anything is possible because this is an incredibly fluid situation, perhaps more fluid than any election since 1864, really, when, the Civil War was raging and the outcome of the war was still uncertain until late. Trump hasn't stood trial yet. And what happens in the trial could change everything. If he's acquitted, that could be an enormous boost to him. He could say, look, once again, I'm vindicated, just like I was in the Russia hoax. If he's convicted of a serious crime, that could spur an enormous backlash against him. Maybe not among his hardcore base, but his hardcore base is about 40%. That's not nearly enough to win an election. And in terms of undecided, middle-of-the-road voters, a conviction of a serious crime could put a major crimp in his campaign. Plus, if he's sitting in trials throughout the election year, there might not be a Trump campaign.
I think he could lose big. I'm just saying. I'm not a prediction professor. I'm not a historian. I'm not an election expert. I sort of think he could get crushed.
It's possible he won't be the nominee. Remember, yeah. I gave you that scenario where he gets nominated, but he's so wounded by serious convictions that the Republican National Committee replaces him.
Yeah. Good question from Finn here.
By the way, he could still run as an independent,
right?
Or, the Libertarian Party candidate.
Good question from Finn here. Considering the fact that Democratic presidents have been largely successful from FDR to Biden, what do you think went wrong for Jimmy Carter, who is viewed as a failed president? Where to begin?
Yeah, I have a lot of admiration for Jimmy Carter. I know him somewhat well. He's the most moral president we've ever had, but he had severe problems. He had a hellaciously bad economy. You talk about inflation today. Inflation was much higher, double digits, under Jimmy Carter, and you had something called stagflation, the misery index, both unemployment and inflation being extremely high. Today you have high inflation, but extremely low unemployment. Ronald Reagan talked about the misery index. He asked, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Plus, he faced all kinds of foreign policy challenges, including the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, the Iran hostage crisis, which he completely and terribly mismanaged. Plus, he made, I think, a very serious strategic mistake. Democrats have succeeded when they've brought benefits to the people, right? Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the Affordable Care Act. Jimmy Carter didn't do that. He was more of a procedural, not a substantive liberal. He looked at things like reforming the structure of government, changing the tax code, but he didn't deliver any big benefit programs to the American people. But, the real world was stacked against him. I don't think anyone could have withstood the problems that Jimmy Carter faced.
We have a super chat from Captain M90s. Thank you so much. They ask, and I'm interpreting this because I think there are some typos here. Why didn't Ralph Nader change the third-party key in 2000?
Great question, because he didn't hit the 5% that is needed nationally to turn the third-party key. However, one could argue, and it's not proven, but one could argue that he got enough votes in Florida to flip Florida to George W. Bush. Remember, Bush won Florida by 537 votes out of 6 million cast. And because of the suppression of the black vote, the wrong person was elected in Florida and the wrong person elected president. Read my report to the United States Commission on Civil Rights. It's still on their website. Or my article in the Journal of Legal Studies, which will explain all of that.
Really quick, Dad, the Smoking Cat asks, which DJ trial do you think will go first? So list them in order that you think they'll go.
I'm not sure I can give you an order, but...
Give us an order!
Oh, quiet. I'm not a lawyer.
Okay.
But I do think the DOJ trial on overturning the election or attempting to overturn the election will go first. Here's why. You have a very strong judge, Judge Chatkin, who said, I believe it's in the public interest to move this trial quickly. The American people need to know whether Trump is guilty or not. Secondly, I think while the trial in New York on the hush money payments is scheduled around the same time as it looks like the DOJ trial may take place, I think the prosecutor in New York will defer to the Department of Justice. With respect to the RICO trial in Georgia, with 19 potential defendants, that's so complicated and so difficult. I don't think it'll occur quickly. Plus the national security case, which I think is an open and shut case, isn't scheduled till later and is likely to be postponed even after that.
Kana Katara, thank you for the super chat, sir. They say, I still have a hard time understanding Key 6, long-term economy. So how do you know when it's true or not? For example, how was it false in 1984 when it was true in 1980? I was hoping you could clear it up for me.
Yeah, I don't recall my exact calculations from back then, to tell you the truth. But it's simple. It's mathematical. You look at the statistics. It's like the mandate key. There's no judgment involved. It's pure numbers. And you look at throughout the term, and it's not, you're not going to get the last quarter, but you get most of it, what has been the real per capita economic growth. And per capita used to matter when the country was growing so rapidly. It doesn't matter anymore. You can just look at the economic growth, and you compare that to the economic growth of the previous two terms, and it has to be at least equal or greater. It's a pure mathematical measure. And right now it's looking pretty good for the Democrats, unless, the economy crashes into a deep recession over the next year.
The Biden administration is thinking about giving Iran their billions of dollars as a trade for American hostages. Would this be a foreign policy key win for Joe Biden?
I don't think so. I haven't heard that they're actually going to do that, and I'm very skeptical, but it's not big enough, for a big foreign policy win, which has to, really implicate the national security and foreign situation of the United States.
Interesting question from Obama Soda, a concurrent viewer. Hello, Obama Soda. Say hello, Dad.
Hello, and we've had you before.
Yes, they say, where did it go? Why didn't McCain get the charisma / war hero key?
Let's start with the war hero key. The war hero key, and you got to read my book because all of this is explained. Predicting the next president, the keys to the White House 2020. Everything is explained. It's the Bible of politics anyway. not the Bible of religion. So,
it's right here.
Yeah.
I'm pointing to it.
The war hero key does not mean heroic performance in war. It means heroic leadership in war. So you have to be someone like Ulysses S. Grant or Dwight Eisenhower, who led the nation in war. It can't be just heroic performance. Otherwise, lots of candidates, including George McGovern, who was one of the great bomber pilots of World War II, would have won the key. So McCain doesn't get that. And in terms of being a charismatic figure, clearly he was not. He might have been in 2000, when he was this fresh, independent voice. But the McCain of 2008, was a very, very different kind of candidate who tried as hard as he could to bend his own beliefs to conform to conventional Republican ideology.
Here's a good question, piggybacking off of that by Alex Treefire, concurrent viewer. What's up, Alex? They say, is it possible for both candidates to pick up the charisma key?
For who to pick up the
both candidates running?
Oh, yes. I can't think of an example of where that's happened, but it's certainly not ruled out because each key for the incumbent and the challenger is evaluated separately.
Do you know about Dark Brandon, Dad? Have you ever heard of that before?
No, what is that?
He doesn't know, people. There's people asking about Dark Brandon, it's like an internet meme trying to make Biden look sort of cooler.
Good luck.
Doesn't know it. He doesn't know
luck.
it. He doesn't know
you
it.
tried to make me look cooler for years and failed.
Right. I don't know what are you talking about?
Actually, I'm really cool.
Right, you're cool. Yeah. Mohammed Bakshalapur with their first super chat. Thank you so much. They say, Professor, will there be an audiobook version of your White Protestant Nation book?
I'd have to check. It's a very good question. The book is 15 years old now. It's my favorite book. It's 600 pages, and it totally rewrites the history of American conservatism. But I'm not sure. It'd be a hell of an audio book for 600 pages.
Seriously, yeah. You might have to.
I don't think they've done that.
I'm sure they've done that.
Yeah, you think? For my book?
Not for your book.
Maybe for War and Peace,
There's definitely books that are longer than that have audio versions, for sure. RBC asks, if Trump is convicted and his cult riots, will that turn the social unrest key?
It might. I don't predict they're going to be significant riots. Here's why. No one's shown up for any of these indictments. There have been more reporters and police than there are pro-Trump demonstrators. And the other thing that has just struck me as utterly weird, where is Trump's family? No Melania, no Jared, no Ivanka, no Trump Jr., no Eric, no Barron. Where are they? Why aren't they supporting Donald Trump? If his own family won't support him, it's hard to believe he's going to, spark a groundswell of insurrection from the American people. I don't think it's going to happen.
Here's an interesting question from Paramashansha Yoganada. Whoa.
Good luck.
Sorry, I'm an English speaker.
I know you're trying as hard as you can.
I'm trying as hard as I can. This is an interesting question, though. What will happen to the MAGA movement after Trump?
Very good question. I wrote a whole book about this, which you should certainly look at. It's called 13 Cracks, after 13 Keys, Repairing American Democracy After Trump, in which I argue, Trump is certainly a huge problem, but he's not the whole problem. There's all this talk about the Trump movement versus the mainstream Republicans. Nonsense. The Trump movement is the mainstream within the Republican Party right now. As you can see, the grassroots and the Republican leadership lining up behind him. So I think, a lot of what Trump represents survives Trump. And a lot of repair work will need to be done.
Harry Ho wants your thoughts on no labels. Harry, we actually have a video in our video section on our channel that answers that. So if you want to go to that, watch that video, that will answer that question.
Cool.
I'm not exactly sure. Captain M90s asked with a super chat, so I want to get to it, but I'm not exactly sure what they're asking.
And of course, we ask get questions from those who are in Super Chats, Joe.
Yes, I think I've asked about half and half so far.
Yeah.
They ask, why 2016 had a third-party key flipped when none had 5%?
Yeah, I had to flip it before, obviously before the election. And the rule is you take the highest polling level for Gary Johnson and you cut it in half, and he polled about 10 to 12%. That's why I flipped the key. I think he wound up about 4%. But, you know, I can't make the call post-election or it wouldn't be a prediction.
Good point. President Nieto, one of our many presidents in the chat, thank you for the super chat. Could there be an inter-party fight when Dems change their primary state order, such as South Carolina going first, making Iowa Dems very mad?
Yeah. No. I don't really see at this point a major challenge to Biden. You know, RFK Jr., Marianne Williamson are fringe candidates, and fringe candidates tend to decline because of the wasted voter syndrome when you actually get into the ballot box. And Biden will be very strong in South Carolina because he's so strong with the black vote. Remember, it was South Carolina that was the pivotal primary in propelling him to the Democratic nomination in 2020. He was considered and also ran.
Right. Joe Biden's been, this is a question, Joe Biden has been showing mental difficulties every day. What do you think of him making it to 24? Should Joe Biden be debating and giving rallies?
I'm no doctor.
I'm going to say he's a doctor. He's a PhD, but he's not an MD.
I'm not a doctor. I will not comment on anyone's health.
Paul Folio asked an interesting question. What does Lichtman, think of
this Lichtman.
Not this Lichtman. Think of Woodrow Wilson's legacy and his influence on FDR?
You know, I could spend an entire class on that, but I will try to be brief. Woodrow Wilson's legacy, most significantly, is establishing the progressive tradition within the Democratic Party. Prior to Wilson, the Democratic Party was Jackson and Grover Cleveland, and they believed in limited government, states' rights, fiscal responsibility, hard money, non-activism by the federal government, and Woodrow Wilson changed all that. He was the first progressive Democratic president. Things like tariff reform, the Federal Reserve Act, antitrust, support for labor. These were things that were brand new in the Democratic Party and clearly laid a foundation for FDR. But Wilson was also terrible on issues of race. Remember, he was from Virginia and unfortunately reflected the racial attitudes of the South.
Is the J6 federal case open and shut the way you say the Florida one is?
I think the Florida, I assume you mean the national security case, is absolutely open and shut. And it's simple.
No, I'm saying, they're saying, right, you said that. They're saying, is the January 6th federal case?
No, I don't think it's as open and shut. I think the evidence is very strong, but it's much more complicated than the national security case, which is dead simple. He stole these documents. He had no right to them. That's a violation of the law, and he obstructed justice in trying to keep them.
Here's an interesting question from Ross Goldberg. We'll just take a couple more questions. So get them in, guys, if you want us to get them. Here's an interesting question from Ross.
I don't know if I'll survive another 10 minutes.
You all right?
I'm good.
Does the fact that most people don't want Biden to run again and he hasn't been able to effectively command much attention from the public mean that his incumbency advantage is weak? That's an interesting question. The key either turns or it doesn't.
The key either turns.
Right? There's not a weak turn or a hard turn.
Probably the weakest incumbent ever was Harry Truman in 1948. One of the news magazines, I forget which one, did a poll of 40 of the nation's leading political experts. And out of 40, do you know how many predicted a win for Harry Truman?
None.
0.
Yes. Got it.
You got it. 0. And yet he still got reelected, and not by a hair. It wasn't, a razor-thin election like 1960 or 1968. He won by, 2 or 3 points, and he brought with him, he overturned the Republican control of Congress that they had won in 1946. And yet he was considered, dead in the water.
What's the future for more liberal or centrist Republicans?
Very dim. As I said, this notion of the Trump Republicans versus the more moderate, more liberal Republicans doesn't exist anymore. And looks like the Republican Party is now losing its most reasoned, most moderate voice, Mitt Romney, who said he's retiring and he's not running again.
That is correct. Interesting question from Patrick Murray. Hello, Patrick. Professor, have you ever had a class with a conservative professor? What was their impact on you?
The last time I had a class was like 60 years ago.
Well, yeah, that's a fair point. I didn't think about that.
I did have classes with conservative professors, not in undergraduate, because I went to Brandeis, a hotbed of liberalism, probably the most conservative. I don't know about the professors, but certainly among the students, the most conservative was a liberal Democrat. But at Harvard was quite different, and I did have at least 2 or 3 conservative professors, and I did okay. But I have to say we had our clashes.
There you go. President Belichick with the super chat. We love you, President Belichick. Although neither of us like the Patriots, just to be clear.
No, we don't.
Neither of us.
And I don't even want to admit what team I'm for.
Well, he's a Giants fan.
Oh,
40
zip.
Do you think Obama will be considered a near great president?
It's possible. You can't judge a president until, long after. And you see the implications of what they've done, all the classified documents get released. But the evaluations of presidents have dramatically changed. Eisenhower and Truman were derided in their own time as, not very great presidents. But over time, both of them, at least by a lot of historians and political scientists, are ranked as near great. So that could happen with Obama.
Here's an interesting clarifying question from Entertainment Vending. And I actually recently saw a couple clips of you a couple years ago saying that the Democrats needed to impeach Biden to flip.
Impeach Biden?
I mean, impeach
Trump to flip the scandal
to flip the candle ski. So they're asking, okay, in the past you said that impeachment in the House automatically flipped the scandal key. Are you no longer saying that with this McCarthy-Biden thing?
There isn't impeachment.
Right, it's just an inquiry right now.
It's just an inquiry. Okay. They haven't voted on anything. And if this impeachment is just pure fabrication and based on nothing, then it departs from the precedents of both Bill Clinton, the Democrat, and Donald Trump, the Republican. And so, there's a long way to go before we make our evaluation.
Monte Brown says, go back and ask my question. I don't see your question, Monte. I'm sorry. How you feeling? How many more you want to take?
2 more.
2 more. Okay. Mike says, how is Ukraine looking for Biden? And have you ever heard of race realism?
I think so.
But let's focus on
I'm going to skip on that.
Yeah.
Yes, I know race realism and realism in general. What it's based on is trying to avoid ideology and base your positions and opinions only on the facts. But Ukraine is undecided. I've said that many times. We don't know the outcome. And, the foreign policy keys could well turn on the outcome of what's going on in Ukraine, which is still very much uncertain. Now, I think if it was just me and my own evaluation, I think it's already a foreign policy triumph. Because if Biden and Biden alone hadn't acted to bring together a coalition of the West to support Ukraine, Russia would have already overtaken Ukraine. So the fact that that hasn't happened and Ukraine is making inroads, I think is a success, but I don't see that as yet penetrating to the American people.
Michael D'Souza Cruz says, Lichtman, you owe us Patriots fans for those 2 Super Bowls. We gave you out of the kindness of our hearts. What do you have to say about that, Dad? A sports
Jerry
take.
Jones and Tom Brady have never given anything out of the kindness of their hearts.
Oh, wow. That was a direct hit. All right, last question of the night. we'll end with some newsworthy stuff. RBC.
Good. I want to get away from the Giants.
Yeah. RBC asks, will the auto strikes negatively affect the economy?
It could. I'm not an economist, but I think I've said this before, as my late great friend Jack Germán once said, there's an economist on every street corner in Washington, and none of them agree with any others. So it certainly is not going to be a plus. How much it might affect the economy is unclear, because they're talking about kind of a structured, tiered set of strikes that would allow the companies, at least for a time, to operate.
Just a correction. I think you said earlier Tom Brady and Jerry Jones had never give anything out of the goodness of their heart. I think you're talking about Jerry Jones is the Cowboys owner. You're getting him confused with who's the Patriots owner. Robert Kraft.
Robert Kraft. You're
Kraft.
Right.
Yeah.
He doesn't either. You're right.
Yeah.
I got the Cowboys on my brain, unfortunately.
Yes. Okay.
Yes, Robert Kraft.
Robert Kraft.
Who would never give up anything.
On
either.
that football note, even though this is a political podcast, we are going to end for the night. Thank you all for watching. Thank you for the questions.
Great questions.
Thank you to all our super chatters. It really, really helps. It's really the only way this makes money.
And
thank
survives.
you so much. And survives.
We're on a shoestring here.
Without you super chatters, we'd be in trouble. Thank you to Barry Smith, who is still watching, Patrick Murray, who's still watching, Mike C., Connor Katara, who's still watching, Michael D'Souza Cruz, who's still watching, Ross Goldberg, who's still watching. We've got 105 people watching right now, but only 55 likes. Guys, throw us a like. It really helps with the algorithm. YouTube takes into account like to watch ratios, pushes videos that have high like to watch ratios.
It's easy to like us.
Anthony
much.
Michael Guitarist, Robert Lopez, Nick, the Smoking Cat, Haitian Redbone, Paul Folo. Thank you all for watching. Have a good Thursday evening. Have a good rest of your weekend.